All right, let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody today to our webinar on the rise of managed cybersecurity and compliance service providers. If you don't know what an MCCP is, hopefully by the end of this webinar you will, but more importantly, you'll understand also the things in the market that are driving the need and the adoption of MCCPs and the creation of this new service provider category. So I'm Tony Jennings. If I can make my screen work. There we go. I'm Tony Jennings, the Chief Revenue Officer at Abacode. I'm an ex-Air Force captain and cyber warfare officer. I also am a 30-year veteran of the cybersecurity space. 25 of those years have been spent in senior management roles across multiple companies and disciplines, so I've been doing this for a while. On the fun side, I'm also an ex-race car driver, did pretty well at that, and love to scuba dive. Probably spend more time than necessary in the gym, but it's not because I love the gym, it's really more because I need something to cancel out the fact that I like bourbon and cigars. So that's me. Mike, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tony, and thanks everyone for joining us today for today's session on managed cybersecurity and compliance providers. As Tony said, my name is Mike Brooks. I'm a virtual Chief Information Security Officer here at Abacode. It's a fancy way of saying that I provide cyber advisory services to our clients. I too have Air Force blood in me. I'm a retired Air Force Cyber Operations Officer, did 22 years in the Air Force. Best decision of my life. I'd highly recommend it. It was one of those things that just was really life-changing. So I got a lot out of it. When I left the military, I transitioned over to Fortune 500 and some Big Four firms for a little bit, and then I've been with Abacode for about 2 years now, kind of working through the advisory piece. I've been in IT my whole career, IT service provider. I've run service organizations to about 6,000 customers, had about 150 staff at one point. So I understand how to do cybersecurity and compliance from a service provider standpoint. I'm also an identical twin. I don't know if we've got any identical twins out there, but love to the twins. As far as my interests, I like to write, hike, bike, stretch, and one of my newest hobbies is finding very, very, very quiet places.
Very good.
Next slide. So thanks again for joining us. What I wanted to do is just kind of highlight the goals, talk a little bit about what we hope to get out of today and the value for you all and for your time and being with us today. So today's presentation is strictly focused on business leaders and security practitioners. And what we want to do is give you a better understanding of this strategic compliance and cybersecurity landscape so you can do a few things. Number one, so that you can understand very clearly what those organizational challenges that you have with regards to cybersecurity and compliance, so that you can discover what those core elements or the building blocks that you need to have to effectively manage your cybersecurity and compliance risk, and then gain clarity on the benefits of this integrated service management approach that we're going to talk about today, because compliance and security are one and the same in regards to the outcome, the business outcome that they deliver. So some key points here to remember: organizational. That's an important perspective to maintain through today's presentation. Core elements. We're going to talk about some specific building blocks that you can take away, and then integrated services. So those are the 3 key points and what we hope to convey with you all today. Next slide.
That's great. Hey, Mike, why don't we start with just you set the stage for what's been kind of driving the need for an MCCP. What are kind of basic things in the market here? First, I'll basically very quickly define what an MCCP is before we start setting the stage for that. But when you think of an MCCP, really, it's just an evolution really of the traditional MSSP space. MSSP being a managed security services provider, which typically, 20 years ago was really just a company that had a SOC, provided virtual SOC services. But really back in that time, their job really was to just help filter through the noise that intrusion detection systems and early SIMs produced, and really just understand when an alert was something you needed to pay attention to. Now that's kind of where the MSSP stopped at that point. They threw it over the fence to the customer at that point. The customer was really responsible for taking that alert and knowing what to do with it, how to remediate, what it meant, etc. That obviously, then evolved to really what a current MSP or our current understanding of an MSSP is, which really revolves around managed detection and response. Still have a VSOC, But really now, instead of just telling you something's wrong or telling the building's on fire, they were now given instructions on how to remediate, what specifically to do from a configuration perspective. Still not generally touching the infrastructure itself. That's typically left to the IT managers or the MSP partners that they're working with. But nonetheless, just taking a more active role in the remediation of these problems that typically you find when you have a VSOC set up. For a number of reasons that we'll talk about here in a few minutes, though, compliance has now become completely intertwined and just as prevalent and important as security has. And so, again, it being a very difficult landscape to navigate, there's been an opportunity for traditional MSSPs to then evolve to the next level, which really is this notion of the MCCP, which at the end of the day simply combines a holistic compliance management program together with a holistic cybersecurity management framework or program together into an integrated program. Kind of think about it as one managed service doing the whole thing, and typically for one convenient kind of monthly subscription fee as well. So really just simplifying the whole landscape around not just cybersecurity, but compliance as well. And so we'll talk more about that as we go into this. But again, Mike, if you want to just kind of set the stage for some of the drivers here, that'd be great. Hey, Mike, I'm not hearing you, bud.
So I think it's important as we set the stage here and we set the frame. We're going to talk a lot about cybersecurity. We're going to talk a lot about compliance today. But as business leaders and as security practitioners, really what it's all about is data. So if you look at data and your data set that you have within your business today or within your organization today, I would make the argument, and you probably would agree with me, that there's not a whole lot you can do, to serve your clients, to serve your customers in today's marketplace without data. So there's a saying out there, data is the new oil. I would take that a step further and say data is the new oxygen in terms of, being able to survive and operate as a business entity in today's digital world, right? How much data is there, right? Well, how fast is it growing? Well, it's growing at an astronomical rate. There is literally a data explosion happening in the world. There's a new category of data volume. It's zettabytes. And there's actually a couple of categories past that have been developed that will, I'm sure, fill into. So a zettabyte is a lot of data. It's 21 zeros on the end of it. We didn't even have enough data in the world for that to be a category until 2010, when there were 2 zettabytes of data in the world. Now in 2020, we've got about 60. So you can see over the course of time that data explosion is exponential. And this is really what is driving the significant demand to keep the data secure, to keep the data available, and to effectively manage the risk to the data.
Hey, Mike, I was kind of inspired by your old iPod graphic here. So I looked at my iPhone. It's a 128 gigabyte iPhone, which means 8 iPhones per terabyte, which means based on your calculation, 1 zettabyte would be this equivalent from a data perspective of 8 billion iPhones. So essentially the equivalent of every person on Earth's iPhone. That's how much storage is in 1 zettabyte.
That's right. Yeah. So exactly. And it's it's a significant amount of data. Obviously, we're adding more to the data set every day. So as we dive in here and really talk about the drivers and how to get, from a business perspective, how do you get your arms around the security and compliance requirements? It is truly about the data. That is what we're really addressing here, and that's why we're seeing such an increase in compliance regulations. So with all of this data out there, I think a fair question is, how are we doing, from a security practitioner standpoint, a security professional, which, I claim to be. How's it going? How are we doing, right? We see that over time, we're not really doing that well, actually. And that there's a lot of reasons for that, and we'll get into some of those reasons, but in terms of data breaches, data leakage, it is very difficult in today's world, as I'm sure you know, to monitor and manage your data set because, again, it is so large, it is so vast, and you are sharing it, literally with everybody that you do business with continuously. So In Verizon's 2020 data breach report, they studied about 4,000 breaches. That's a slight uptick, I believe, over time. And again, we're continuing to see, more breaches. Ransomware is quadrupled in its prevalency over the last 12 to 18 months. We can look in the IBM report, 2020 report, and we see that hey, data breaches, it's a 7-figure problem. It's even a bigger problem for small to mid-sized businesses because by the numbers, it's going to put about 66% of those businesses that experience a breach out of business simply because it is so devastating to recover from. So again, this is just to set the frame, to set the tone for what we're going to be discussing today. The fear, uncertainty, and doubt card has been way overplayed. These are factual numbers. These are actual numbers. Again, it's a 7-figure problem. The U.S. has the highest cost of any country out there. Healthcare industry is the most expensive to experience a breach in, and they're not quick to clean up, to identify and remediate and contain, and take all the necessary steps to restore yourself. Is about 9 months cycle right now based on those organizations that have been studied. So. This leads right into the market drivers, Tony, that I think you can talk a little bit more in depth about.
Yes, let's just kind of piggybacking on what you said. At the end of the day, I mean, there's a lot of data. It's growing. It's not going to stop growing. We haven't historically done a great job of protecting that data, obviously. So it's no wonder then that you have a proliferation of compliance standards that have popped up, and obviously there's more popping up all the time. And why not? I mean, at the end of the day, if I have data that I need to protect because it's sensitive to me and I'm going to share it with somebody, how do I know that I can trust that person to protect the data? Well, obviously, this is why compliance standards exist, to force what I would call minimum viable security on folks that might not otherwise do so, and that I otherwise wouldn't trust to protect my data. So at the end of the day, compliance becomes a yardstick by which we measure our cybersecurity maturity, our cybersecurity programs. And so they've been inextricably and permanently closely interwoven now with our cybersecurity programs. So I think at the end of the day, that's one of the things that's driving the need for, compliance expertise to be combined with and integrated with cybersecurity expertise. You combine that with the fact that not being compliant, there's increasing impacts of that. Everything, in fact, I would argue that it's more or less now a condition of doing business that you've got to be compliant with something. And there's some folks we talk to that say, well, I don't process credit cards, so I don't care about PCI, I'm not in healthcare, I don't care about HIPAA. Well, I would argue that anybody that needs to protect data, anybody that is serious about cybersecurity, you've got to measure your program against something, right? Even if it's a simple CIS top 20 framework, you've got to have some yardstick to measure your business to show somebody else that you have the appropriate minimum level of cybersecurity maturity. So it's a condition of doing business now. Obviously, with the proliferation, it has some of the same problems that cybersecurity has historically had around complexity, both from a technology perspective and a vendor landscape perspective. It just, as with cybersecurity compliance, there's more demand for that talent than there are folks that can deliver those services or that expertise. So you've got a lack of qualified or affordable folks. And obviously, the threat environment is not getting any better. I would argue that in addition to the COVID pandemic, we now have experienced over the last year or so the ransomware pandemic. And in fact, I would argue that you could make an argument, I guess, prior to ransomware being so prevalent, that cybersecurity was maybe a vertical concern. If I'm a bank or I'm the DoD, I've got to be concerned about cybersecurity. But with ransomware, any business that has anything that's north of zero on their balance sheet becomes a target. So I would say ransomware in particular has made cybersecurity a horizontal concern instead of a vertical concern. So I think all these things together are really conspiring to drive the need for more than just the status quo from a security services provider perspective. Hence, companies like Abaco that are popping up that are now being called MCCPs by the analyst community and others.
Yeah, that's great, Tony. And as we talk about this, it's very easy, and this gets complicated. This gets complex very quickly when we start to talk about numerous compliance standards, when we start to talk about the rapid adoption of technologies, business requirements, the speed of need, as we start to move through these things, this does get fairly complex fairly quickly. But it is important to keep kind of the main thing here from Mr. Covey's perspective, and that really is the risk, right? That is what a compliance standard is designed to do, is to effectively manage risk and to provide trust, assurance, and efficiencies. So that's the driver that we're seeing. You can think of the compliance standards as kind of the formal declaration from those regulatory or statutory groups in terms of what they're comfortable with from a risk standpoint. So the main thing here with regards to the data is all around the risk and keeping that risk effectively managed for the business so that the business can continue to operate. Again, from a business leader standpoint, that's what you want to do. You want to be able to operate securely and compliantly, I'll say it that way. And then from a security practitioner standpoint, that's what I want too. I want the business to run. I don't want security to be a barrier to performance. And so we need to set the conditions inside of the business or inside of the organization to where we can operate securely and compliantly. And the way that we do that is through risk management.
And I think that's a good way to point out, again, just kind of underlining the term minimum viable security. And that differs from organization to organization. It depends on what your strategic goals are, your risk tolerance, your budget, all those things together help you working with a partner like Avocode or other MCCPs understand what your minimum viable security posture needs to look like.
Yep. And so, another thing that I see a lot with, now talking to folks regularly every day about, their compliance requirements and how do we do this? And, we've got to meet this new requirement and I'm not even sure what this acronym stands for. It's not a single compliance standard that you're probably going to be impacted by. It's going to be multiple. It would be nice if there was a universal standard, but there's not. Everybody's got their own, and the sprawl is going to continue for the foreseeable future. So just to use a notional example to give you some background and some context here for how this comes together, and I'm sure you guys are feeling this inside your own businesses and organizations, today. But let's hypothetically speaking, let's look at the example of ABC California Software Company, right? That's something I made up. If it exists, I'm not aware of it, but let's pretend that we're a software company in California. And we have an application that the federal government has purchased from us and wants to use. So we're under contract there. As a cloud service provider to the federal government, we have to meet a FedRAMP, which is the government's cloud security compliance standard. We have to meet the moderate baseline. Let's, for sake of argument, there's a low, moderate, and high, but let's just say we've got to meet the moderate. That's 325 security controls. That's for that specific application, for the scope of that application that we're developing for the government. In addition to that, we also offer our goods and services directly to the government with some other contracts. So we have a NIST 800-171 requirement there that pulls in an additional 110 security controls. We have international clients that we do business with. They've required us to maintain certification to the International Standard for Information Security, which is ISO 27001. That pulls in about 114 additional security controls. We sell things on our online store. We've got an online presence. We accept payments online. So that's going to pull in our PCI, payment card industry requirements. It's about 200-ish requirements and sub-requirements. And then we've also got privacy requirements now because we're in California. We're doing business internationally. And we don't even really know what those are until we can start to put together a data map in terms of where's the data, how's it working. So in this pretty simple example, you can see a fairly extensive compliance footprint here. And it's important to realize is you don't want to attack these things individually. You don't want to go off and build individual programs because that's not going to be sustainable for your business. So we'll start to talk a little bit about now where do you start with something like that. The good news is if you look across these compliance standards, The requirements are fairly standard across the different standards, right? There is a core set of requirements that you need to be able to meet. The biggest challenge today is figuring out how to integrate all of those into this multi-compliance framework so that you can do access control one time, demonstrate that capability and take credit for it from a compliance standpoint, but then also from a security standpoint that you're actually implementing, good access control with solid security principles, and you're moving through your requirements in that way in terms of establishing a program by which you can manage your cybersecurity and compliance risk. So the best place to start is by finding a cybersecurity framework, a large one like the NIST cybersecurity framework, or NIST 800-53 baseline, or even the ISO 27001 information security management system framework, something that you can attach and integrate all these additional compliance requirements into. That's going to get you about 80% there, and then it's just a matter of, okay, well, what's the delta for that specific compliance requirement, right? How do we integrate that into what we're doing? So the way that you deliver that value to your business and to your organization is through services. Another challenge in our industry, in the cybersecurity and compliance industry, is we're product overwhelmed, right? We're product saturated in terms of what's happening out in the market. So there's products for everything, but those products need to be delivered via services. And I would say we're product rich, service poor, in terms of there's not a lot of folks out there that understand true service management back to the IT days. If you think about core services, when IT started delivering enterprise services, there were IT core services, things that everybody needed. And we found out that, everybody needs to email, everybody needs to use the internet, everybody needs to share files, and everybody needs to print. Let's package those in an enterprise service and deliver those out to the business so that we can support all of our customers rather than try to piecemeal this thing one at a time. And so that's the model that we're seeing now with the compliance drivers. There is a core set of services within all of these compliance standards that can really be delivered out through to your business in the same way that we did IT core services 20, 25 years ago. So the service concept is very, very important. That is the actual means by how you're going to deliver value and facilitate those outcomes that the compliance standard requires, that your business demands, and that your customers and clients expect. So when we look across the different compliance standards, whether it's NIST, whether it's ISO, PCI, HIPAA, SOC 2, we see that those core elements, those core components, the building blocks, if you will, are risk management. Again, keep the main thing the main thing. So cyber risk management is the central item for how you're going to develop all of your countermeasures, and we call those security controls, your countermeasures and security controls, and how you're going to build that control environment to demonstrate compliance and security to these standards. So risk management is critically important. Once we understand what our risk exposure is, once we understand how we're managing the risk to the data, we can then develop the governance layer around that data. We can start to create the traffic rules for who's going to do what is allowed, what isn't allowed, where's the boundary, how do we keep everybody safe, how do we set the conditions by which everybody can operate securely and safely, assuming that they're abiding by all of the governance that we've put in place. Those are our policies and procedures. That's a critical component, agnostic of a standard. IT secure configuration, that's also another very important item that you'll find across all the different standards. So 50% of it is, bad guys, malicious actors. The other 50% we control with our IT configurations and with user behavior. So we can draw down a significant amount of risk by having a secure configuration, understanding what our secure baselines is, what does it look like when it's all locked down and we've got all green lights everywhere, and then how do we keep those green lights green? More importantly, do we know when they're starting to shift yellow and then turning red, or do we just know that, I smell smoke, something's bad's going on? So those are the kinds of things that we want to manage and maintain with secure configuration. There's only really one way to do security and compliance, and it's continuously. It doesn't start and stop. It happens all the time, just like it happens in your lives, with keeping yourself safe and keeping yourself secure. It's the same with your data. So you got to have that mindset that, this stuff needs to be monitored and logged continuously. That's another core element of all of the different compliance standards. Once we have everything under monitoring, we've got all of our configurations set, we've established the governance, we know what risks we're managing to, then we've got to have some way of assessing in our environment, again, continuously, where are the new vulnerabilities? What are those things that are exposing us where we weren't exposed previously? That's the green to yellow light, if you think of it that way. Something that we've got a new exposure that we need to address. That's continuously, that needs to happen all the time. That is another core component of all the compliance standards. If something were to happen, whether it would be something that a user did an accidental human error type thing, or we do have some indicators that there's malicious activity going on, and we do, no kidding, have an incident that we need to respond to. The business needs to very quickly be able to respond to that incident, contain the damage, and then be able to recover from it. That's another core component of the different compliance standards. And then lastly, the users and everybody that's touching the data really needs to know what are my core responsibilities as a steward of the data, and how do I keep it safe, and how do I keep it compliant, and how do I abide by all the policies and procedures we have. So when you look at this landscape and you look at the compliance standards and you look at the security standards and you look at things like SolarWinds and Exchange servers and all these different vulnerabilities and stuff that's happening out in the wild, you've got to bring it back to how do we manage this, and we manage this via a program through the delivery of enterprise security and compliance services.
Yeah, and Mike, there was a question from the audience around, the question was, aren't many of these controls either the same or overlapping? I think obviously that's, I think you answered it with this particular slide, and that yes, if you look across these standards, generally about 80% of all the controls are common from standard to standard, which really leads into a good segue then into, the MCCP model itself. So if you look at what a typical MCCP or holistic MCCP at least is going to offer, they're going to offer a service stack of core components that, when implemented, would cover those 80% common security controls. And that's the goal. The goal is to basically have a service stack that, if you deploy, you're most of the way there to those particular compliance standards. In addition to that, of course, a competent or holistic MCCP will work with your IT team and your executive team to make sure you get 100% of the way there. But by simply implementing this or a similar core service stack, you get there. I mean, if you look at this stack, you're talking about a risk assessment. Whatever that gap assessment says are gaps in your control, you implement those or fill those gaps. Develop policies. Continuous monitoring, both from a compliance and a cybersecurity perspective, is core, and I would argue probably one of the most biggest bang for the buck in terms of ROI around actually buttoning down your network and being secure is monitoring. Of course, testing, vulnerability assessments, pen tests, user awareness training, VCSO services, so you have the guidance at the senior level that you need when you need it. Up to and including digital forensics and incident response services. So this is a very holistic service stack. When implemented, you end up with 24/7, 365, eyes on glass. It's kind of traditional MDR, managed detection and response, threat hunting and compliance monitoring, but also, again, the additional mapping onto your compliance standards, continuous compliance monitoring as well. And typically these are going to be turnkey programs, etc. So this is typically, when you say what is an MCCP, this is typically what you're going to get. You're going to get a service stack that's going to allow you to implement the common controls that exist across the various compliance standards. And Mike, I don't know if you want to add anything to that or not.
Yeah, Tony, and this, when we talk about IT core services and you think about email, file, print, web, well, these are the security and compliance core services. And when it comes time for you to implement this, this service stack, you've really got three options. You could do it yourself, you could partner with somebody, or you could outsource the whole thing. in any of those scenarios, I do want to make the point that you still need to be involved. You still need to be providing the guidance from the business and organizational perspective. Your security folks can help you with that. Hopefully, if you got a security leader that consult you and can help the business make good decisions around risk, around control implementation, and around some of the nuance to the different control standards. Yes, they're 80% similar, but sometimes it's the way that you answer the control or the way that you can implement a control where you can make it applicable across 3 or 4 different standards simply by the way that you're coming out approaching the design of the control. And we'll get into this service lifecycle here in the next slide, but I do want to make that key point that you still need to be involved because it's your risk, it's your data, it's your reputation here on the line, and you need to understand what these compliance standards are, how they affect your business, and what's the easiest way that you can demonstrate compliance, but more importantly, deliver security. So you want to demonstrate compliance, deliver security, and the way that that's done is through this service lifecycle. For anybody out there that's familiar with service management, it's a very similar model here. Or if you're familiar with, plan, do, check, act, this is very similar to that. In the design phase, this is the critical phase where we are going to look at those compliance requirements. We're going to look at the business requirements. We're going to look at what are the options for meeting the compliance. In some cases, risk acceptance is a viable strategy, right? To accept risk is a viable strategy as long as it's a conscious decision on behalf of the business. In some cases, risk transfer is a viable option, and hey, we're gonna offload that to a provider, or we're gonna offload that to our insurance policy. That is a viable strategy. So in this design phase is really where the architecture comes together. It's really where the IT, security, and compliance folks are working hand in hand with the business, providing that advisory to make sure that the requirements are very well understood and they're being solutioned in a way that's going to keep the business moving and operating in that safe zone that we talked about earlier, right? Put a boundary around it, all green lights inside the boundary, we're good to go. That's the way we've designed it. Once we start to move into implement.
Hey, Mike, just one other thing. To me, when I think about the design phase, it's like understanding, okay, I'm going to measure myself so I understand I'm at point A. And then based on those things you said, business risk, budget, risk tolerance, all those things, based on my business objectives. I now know I'm at point A. How do I get to point B? I know where point B is now, and then it's really just a matter of getting yourself into a maturity model through this life cycle that we're talking about here to get you from point A to point B. Exactly.
Yeah, that's right, Tony. And I would even say in the design phase, the first question isn't where am I? The first question is where are we going? What do we need to be able to do?
That's right.
What are our requirements? Then we can look at where are we? We can determine what that gap is. We go into the implementation or remediation. We can start making those smart business decisions around risk, right, and around the data set. And sometimes it's put less of this out there. Move some of it over here. Let's create a structure that works for the business and works for our stakeholders. Once we get things implemented, once all of the instrumentation is out in the environment and we know what's happening and we've got things, we can now put that under 24/7 monitoring. We can do the vulnerability management that we talked about earlier, and we want to be continually reporting. This is another key component of the life cycle. You want to be able to demonstrate and prove that, hey, yeah, I'm compliant with these standards. Look, here's a report, boom. Something to the board, maybe something to a contract representative, something to a potential client, something to an existing client, to give them that trust and that assurance that, everything is in place. This is how we're managing it. This is how it's set up, and this is how it's performing. What that's going to do,
which I think is the ultimate objective. I mean, at the end of the day, if this is a condition of doing business, being able to prove to those that you do business with, or your prospects or customers, that you can be trusted with their data and actually have proof because it's been measured against the yardstick of a compliance framework. I think at the end of the day, that's the goal, to be able to speak with confidence in those scenarios.
Yeah, and and I'm sure everybody would agree. At the end of the day, we don't do IT for IT's sake. We don't do security for security's sake, right? We're serving the greater good, the greater need of the business and the organization. That's what we're delivering. That's the value. And the data is what we're securing and protecting, and nobody can really do anything without that. So this is a business, issue. This is a strategic business program that needs to be put in place. You need to have the capability to demonstrate and meet these security and compliance requirements in a continuous programmatic way, 24/7, 365. And that's what identifying those core services will do for you. That's what mapping those requirements and understanding what they are, and then doing the crosswalk over to say, okay, this is how we're implementing them. This is how we're going to manage them on the go forward. This is the reporting. And then if something does go wrong, this is how we're going to know, and this is how we're going to respond. That is ultimately the goal to serve the business, and again, to serve your clients and your customers.
Yeah, and so since you mentioned, continuous monitoring and continuous cybersecurity monitoring, continuous compliance monitoring, as similar to a traditional MSSP, MCCP is also the core of their business is their SOC. In our case, the SOC is kind of compliance aware, if you will, compliance enabled, so that the goal is not just your typical managed detection and response, but also the ability to monitor for compliance misconfigurations and whatnot on an ongoing basis as well. Clearly, you want to know if someone's knocking on the front door or someone's trying to break into your network. Clearly, that's where MDR comes in. But also, you want to know if there's been a misconfiguration of some kind, whether accidental or on purpose, that could cause you to slip out of compliance and ultimately cause a cybersecurity issue as well. So in this MCCP model, compliance and cybersecurity again are fused, even at the SOC level. More importantly, I guess fundamentally at the SOC level as well.
Yeah, and technology is going to help us out a whole lot here, right? Too. So there's a lot of technology we can leverage, Tony, in that example, both from the security and from the compliance side. On the compliance side, something as simple as making sure you're doing periodic reviews of privileged accounts. That can be an alert that if that doesn't get done by a certain day or time, that alert gets triggered. We can do the same thing with policy reviews and some of these other regulatory requirements that you may have. Those can now get put into a maintenance mode. Those can get put into our centralized monitoring and command and control node, so that we know exactly when things do start to turn yellow. We know what activities need to happen inside of the business to stay in front of our current requirements, and then be able to integrate these new requirements, because you're going to continue to get compliance requirements until we get a little bit further down the road in terms of maturity overall on this. There's going to be new requirements coming at you from business partners, coming at you from regulatory bodies, coming at you from all these different areas. So it is people, process, and technology, right? You want to make sure you got the right folks, you've got the processes inside, and that you're leveraging, this type of technology to deliver those business outcomes in a pretty seamless and efficient way. What you don't want to do is manually monitor this via spreadsheets. You don't want to conduct, monthly reviews, manual monthly reviews, and really have no insight into how you're performing from a security and compliance standpoint. That is what the Security Operations Center will do. Think of it as a calibration mechanism. It's going to keep everything within limits, so that nothing kind of gets out of bounds. And then if it does, we know immediately, and we can move in and correct it. Right.
And so let's talk for a second about the benefits. If you're using an MCCP to implement their core services to provide you essentially a kind of a one-stop shop, a one throat to choke, compliance and cybersecurity team, obviously you get a lot of advantage of that. Rather than having a monthly bill for monitoring and a quarterly bill for vulnerability assessments, a semi-annual bill for pen tests, maybe a contract here and there for some advisory services. You get to roll this into one integrated managed service, one easy, simple monthly subscription fee. You obviously have the ability to have not just cybersecurity, but also compliance monitored continuously, 24/7, 365. You're getting an entire compliance and cybersecurity team for a fraction of the cost. Clearly, for you to replicate this, you're talking of a team of a dozen folks probably, with all the various expertise required, the round-the-clock monitoring, etc. It's quite an investment. Obviously, if you're using an MCCP, you get that for a fraction of the cost, typically around the cost of one FTE for an entire program. As Mike pointed out earlier, you have the ability at that point to continuously attest to not only auditors, but more importantly, your prospects and your clients that, hey, yes, I can be trusted with your data. I've got a mature cybersecurity program that meets the standards that you're requiring of me. And at the end of the day, I think it just resolves at the end of the day, it gives you the ability, whether you refine oil, you make tires, oil filters, whatever you do, it allows you to focus on your core business and leave this part of the equation to folks like Abacode, MCCPs like Abacode, who this is all we do. I mean, we live, eat, and breathe this. We stay up with the latest trends. We understand and have, continually filter through the complex landscape that's out there, not only of technology, but of compliance mandates, proliferation, things like that. So I hope that you've been able to, take away and understand what an MCCP is, what the factors in the market are that driving the need for MCCPs, and understand a little bit more about the benefits that an MCCP can bring to your organization. So Mike, why don't you discuss next steps for folks who would like to learn more?
Yeah, Tony, thanks. So again, we talked about the main thing being the main thing is, I would recommend you understand your requirements. If you don't understand what those are, you need to look at those, and you need to conduct that risk management strategy session, kind of at the business level, to truly understand where you're going to spend time and where you're going to spend money with regards to meeting your compliance and security requirements, to be able to provide the trust and assurance that you want to deliver to your clients and your customers and those folks that do business with you. So that's critically important. And I will say that from the business side, we've got to get better. We've got to do better with business integration. We've got to do better with the business understanding and business leadership understanding. And in most cases, they're willing and able to provide the resources. There's just a little bit of a lack of understanding truly in a consolidated approach. That's one of the things that we're trying to solve here. And then on the practitioner side, as a security practitioner and professional, I think that we've got to get better. This has got to be lighter and leaner. This has got to be something that it works for the business. So that risk management strategy is where you can kind of have those decision conversations around, well, is option A, B, or C the best option for us in our particular situation? So that's critically important. I would recommend you also do a program assessment. This is another one of those continuous things that you should be doing on a regular basis, maybe quarterly or semi-annually, even annually. But you should have some sense for how are things working? Where are our gaps? Is everything set up and operating correctly? We've got a team of solution advisors that can help walk you through what the best options are for your program assessment. Could be something very, very light, could be something a little bit heavier. It just really depends, but that's a key step that I would highly recommend you look at and do. That'll give you some clarity on where do we need to go and where are we now and how do we get there. You are going to have gaps. Everybody that I've worked with, and when I was doing this operationally, there are always going to be gaps. There's always going to be risk exposure. What you want to do is know about it, and know about where are those areas where we need to make investment, and make sure that investment lines up with your planning cycles. Make sure that those things are identified. Make sure that any risks to your folks, to your personnel and skill sets are being addressed, and that you actually have a plan to kind of close those gaps around your resources. Some of the resource component tends to slow things down a little bit at times, and it's not because the resources aren't available. Again, it's because it's not real clear, and we got to do a better job of that. So, and then the last kind of next step is you just monitor, manage, and prepare for more. Again, I don't think that this is going to get any easier or simpler anytime soon. I think technology will help us. I think the platform vendors will help us. I think the sprawl of compliance standards is not going to help us, quite honestly. So critical
until there's one big super standard, it's going to continue to go this way. Yeah, and I think that's going to be a long time.
Right? Yeah, we can lean on things like the NIST CSF. We can lean on ISO 27001, but what really kind of gets me scratching my head sometimes is where you've got a small governing body of something that creates their own cybersecurity standard, right? Or adopts, parts of this one, parts of this one, parts of this one, and they've created something new that we've got to now integrate and figure out. Oh, well, this looks exactly like this other thing, and so that a critical success factor for you and for your business moving forward in terms of your data protection and data security with regards to security and compliance is really going to be how quickly can we integrate these compliance requirements and how quickly can we get into a managed state and stay there? That's the ultimate goal here. So that's what I would recommend in terms of next steps.
Okay, and so I think that's it for us. I want to thank everybody for their time today. Hope you enjoyed the presentation and learned something as well. And hope to see you on another future topic sponsored by Abaco. Hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.